Hi everyone, it's Katrina, Chenu. Algonquin folklore speaks of cannibalistic ice giants that apparently used to roam North America. These icy monsters are called Chenu and may have been compared to other Native American monstrosities like the Wendigo. Chenu are described as being bigger than a man, growing larger the hungrier they get. These things have sharp fangs and started out as human beings. Legend has it that when a person is corrupted by dark magic, cursed to eat the flesh of other humans, they turn into cannibal ice beasts. Their bodies become painfully warm, forcing them to live out in the snow like yetis. Algonquin legend says there are only a handful of ways that you can kill these icy monsters. You can rip out their icy hearts, trick them into eating salt, or feed them so much that they throw up and die. There aren't many modern sightings of ice giants in Atlantic Canada or New England, where these stories of the Chenu originated. But when European settlers first arrived in the area, they were warned by the Algonquin about these evil spirits. To the natives, the giant ice cannibals were a lot more than just stories. These were real monsters lurking in the snow, ferocious beasts that should be feared. What do you think this creature really was? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. The Antarctic Godzilla. The Soya was a Japanese icebreaker that served as a research vessel in the 1930s and 1950s. The ship is still around today, currently functioning as a museum in Tokyo after being moored in 1979. In 1958, the research vessel received assistance from a U.S. ship after it got itself stuck in some glacial ice in Antarctica. The vessel was then freed, allowing it to continue sailing through open water. And that was when the crew witnessed a monster. Right in front of the ship, eyewitnesses saw something huge break through the surface of the water. The creature was covered in what appeared to be dark brown fur, and it had the face of what looked like a cow. But according to some accounts, it also had primate-like features. The monster had large eyes as well as pointy ears and shoulders. It almost looked like a massive aquatic ape. The encounter only lasted for a few seconds before the creature dove back under the water. Nobody managed to take a photograph, and the monster was never seen by anyone else again. Nothing like it has ever been witnessed in Antarctic waters, and many believe the crew of the Soya were imagining things. The monster became known as the large Antarctic sea mammal, or the Antarctic Godzilla. And it's such a weird story, with so little evidence to back it up, that many wonder if it ever happened at all. It's shout-out time! I want to give a big thank you to Honey Singh and Angry Gun 7 for supporting this channel. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos about amazing discoveries or bizarre creature sightings. Chena River Ice Monster. An Alaskan ice monster was recently filmed swimming in the remote Chena River near Fairbanks. The clip surfaced online thanks to an employee at the Alaska Bureau of Land Management. The unidentified creature can be seen in the footage moving through the river like a giant serpent with chunks of ice attached to its scaly flesh. The video was viewed over 1 million times soon after it was uploaded, with no one able to come up with a decent explanation for what the creature might be. Some speculated it was a large sturgeon, while others said it might be a shark. But there were even those who believed it to be an icy river monster. Craig McCaw was the employee responsible for capturing the chilling video. He was taking photographs in Fairbanks to document seasonal landscape changes when he happened upon what looked like a 15-foot sea serpent. Craig told the Alaska Dispatch News that at first he thought it was some kind of rope with chunks of ice on it. But the object, or the creature, came and went so fast it was impossible to tell what it might have been. Experts believe, after watching the footage, that the sea monster was nothing but a string of slushy ice moving with the river's current. Still, there are those who want to believe in the presence of a sea beast. For all we know, there really is some kind of primordial monster living in the Chena River. It may have even been something from the ocean that accidentally wound up in the waterway. What do you think it was? Let me know in the comments below. The Ningen. For the last 2 decades, there have been reported sightings of a terrifying Antarctic sea monster. The story started in the early 2000s with Japanese researchers when a government employee working at a whale research facility supposedly encountered a mysterious creature. The employee was accompanied by some of his colleagues, all of whom they thought were looking at a foreign submarine moving just below the surface of the water. The object was pale and so big that it either had to be a whale or a vessel. But then, when the object moved close enough for the crew to see clearly, they realized it was alive, and that it most definitely was not a whale. The creature became known as the ningen, and there have been other sightings since the whale research facility first spotted it. The creature appeared in a Japanese magazine article in 2007, complete with a Google Maps image that supposedly featured it. The ningen is said to be completely white, with no distinctive facial features, and apparently it's over 90 feet long. It only has a mouth and 2 pairs of giant vacant eyes. Eyewitnesses also can't agree on what kind of appendages the ningen has. Some say it has arms and legs, while others claim that the monster only has tentacles. As of right now, we don't have any concrete evidence that such a creature exists. All we have are strange encounters detailed in obscure Japanese magazines and blogs on the internet. There are no definitive photographs of the ningen, and there are very few reliable eyewitness testimonies, but that doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't exist. Alaskan sea serpent. In 2009, video footage was captured off the coast of Alaska showing what appears to be a sea serpent. The video footage was so convincing that Jonathan and Andy Hillstrand from the TV show Deadliest Catch went hunting for it. The creature supposedly dwells in the frigid waters along the coast of British Columbia and up into the icy region of Alaska. Its nickname is Caddy, short for Cadborosaurus wilsey. And although it's already been given a name by some overly enthusiastic scientists, there is very little proof that the sea serpent exists. The animal has been spotted multiple times since the 1930s. In 1967, one man even claimed that he saw an infant sea serpent swimming through the water. The creature was about 16 inches long and was scaly like an eel, but it also had flippers like a dolphin. The man who encountered the sea serpent, William Hageland, even managed to catch the baby monster and put it in a bucket. However, he felt bad for the creature, so he freed it before he could take a photograph or give the monster to scientists. Andy Hillstrand says it would be extremely unlikely for ordinary animals to be mistaken for sea serpents so many times in the same area. Those who have witnessed Caddy are almost always seasoned fishermen familiar with local marine life. These are people who would easily be able to identify any normal animals from the area. Unfortunately, the hunt for the serpent wasn't a success. The 2009 video was convincing, but the ensuing research for the elusive sea monster turned up nothing. If one really is out there, it somehow evaded all our modern technology while only revealing itself to random fishermen. The Loch Ness Monster of Antarctica. Paleontologists working in Antarctica recently found the remains of a very real monster. Researchers claim that the creature looked just like an ancient version of the Loch Ness Monster. It was a prehistoric plesiosaur, a marine reptile with 4 huge flippers that lived during the age of the dinosaurs. This particular species was colossal, measuring an astounding 36 feet from the tip of its nose to the end of its tail. Scientists say it's currently the largest known plesiosaur of its kind on record. But of course, the plesiosaur lived long before Antarctica was covered in ice. The ancient marine behemoth was alive 66 million years ago, meaning it most likely went extinct along with the dinosaurs after the asteroid collided with Earth. Its fossilized remains were found on Seymour Island, embedded in almost 2,000 pounds of rock. Antarctica may not have been as cold during the age of the dinosaurs as it is now, but it was still colder than most other places on Earth. The giant plesiosaur likely lived in the chilly waters and feasted primarily on a steady diet of jellyfish. Scientist Jose O'Gorman from the National University of La Plata says its immense size suggests a thriving ecosystem, meaning it had plenty of food to eat. O'Gorman even believes there was enough food available to the plesiosaur to keep it going for several thousand years after the extinction event began. You're unlikely to spot one of these prehistoric monsters nowadays in Antarctica, but what's really strange is that all the depictions of the Loch Ness Monster match with descriptions of the plesiosaur. Some think one of these creatures might have survived all these years, hidden in Scotland's Loch Ness. Do you believe in the Loch Ness Monster? Let me know in the comments below. And while you're at it, be sure to subscribe. Yuki Onna. In the snowy ice fields of northern Japan, there is a monster unlike any of the other creatures I've told you about today. It's called the Yuki Onna, and it can be found in the Japanese Alps. This monster takes the form of a beautiful woman with long dark hair, black eyes, and skin as white as snow. The Yuki Onna supposedly live on the island of Hokkaido, where they feed on the life force of travelers lost in heavy snowstorms. A single touch from this monster is enough to send a person into an irreversible chill. It's easy to dismiss the Yuki Onna as just another bizarre Japanese legend, yet there are some strange stories of people who claim to have encountered these evil entities in the wild. One particular man from far in the north once claimed that he married a Yuki Onna. He claims that he only found out about it when she took a hot bath one day and turned into a pile of melting icicles. South Sea serpents. In December of 1967, a pair of serpents were observed by helicopter pilots in Antarctica. At the time, the pilots were with the whaling factory ship called Zovitskaya Rossiya. The men claimed they saw giant sea monsters up to 50 feet long moving with convulsive motions. In other words, they were slithering through the water like preposterously large snakes. The helicopter pilots even warned the other vessels in the area to watch out for the animals because it wasn't clear what kind of damage they could do. They were bigger than any living serpent, and nobody has ever come up with a sound explanation for what the pilots saw. All these years later, there have been dozens of reports of serpent-like creatures seen in Antarctica. Some have even claimed to witness sea serpents hunting entire pods of whales and traveling in groups like oversized packs of eels. Anthropologist Dale Drinan once said he believes these serpents could be ancient marine animals, the same reptilian-like beasts that have been seen off the coast of New Zealand. Have you ever seen anything strange in the water? Let me know in the comments. Organism 46b. Vostok Station is a remote research outpost in Antarctica where a team of Russian scientists supposedly captured a monster. According to the tale, which has become something of an urban legend over the past few years, the scientific team identified a new species of squid with some unusually frightening powers. The squid was about 33 feet long, living in a subglacial lake 2 miles underneath solid ice. When the scientists from Russia broke through into the icy world for the first time, exposing the squid to outside air, it became extremely aggressive. The squid supposedly killed 3 of the scientists before they managed to securely contain it. The creature was nicknamed Organism 46b. It supposedly displayed an unprecedented amount of hostility, intelligence, and cunning. Maybe like an octopus? But in the end, it's difficult to say how much of this story is true. Vostok Station is a real place, established by the Soviets in 1957. Ever since 1974, scientists have known about the vast liquid lake underneath the station. And for the past 30 years or so, there has been a lot of ice core drilling going on. The discovery of the monster allegedly took place between 2012 and 2016, but the exact details have proven impossible to track down. Most reliable sources, however, claim the whole story is a hoax. The ice worm. In 1345, the first ever sighting of the Icelandic ice worm was reported. The serpentine creature was supposedly seen in Lagarflot, a large lake near the ancient town of Egilsstadir. Ever since, there have been strange rumors surrounding the lake, with many locals believing there truly is a creature hiding somewhere in its icy depths. After the first reports came out in the 14th century, The serpent in the lake began appearing on world maps. Wherever Iceland was drawn on a map, it was accompanied by a serpent in a lake. The monster was seen again in 1749, with the most recent sighting being in 2012, when something unusual was caught on video swimming in Lagarflot. This is the Icelandic version of the Loch Ness Monster, only people have been seeing it for almost 700 years. Lagarflot itself is a freshwater glacial lake with extremely poor visibility. It isn't that deep, but the lake is vast. Even though the creature is said to be the size of a bus, it's had no issue hiding down in the deepest recesses of the waterway. The ice worm was witnessed in 1963 by the man in charge of the Icelandic National Forest Service, Sigurður Blöndal. Contractors laying a telephone cable in 1983 also witnessed something they couldn't explain. There was something huge moving through the water, and they later found something had damaged their equipment. In 1998, a local teacher and their students collectively witnessed the animal while on a field trip to the lake. Do you think this monster is real? Let me know in the comments. Buried Atlantis. In 1958, historian Charles Hapgood made an exciting proposal. He shared something he called pole shift theory. Charles believed that the Earth's crust had moved so much that only 12,000 years ago, large portions of Antarctica were completely free of ice. Charles was a firm believer of his theory and used an ancient map discovered in Turkey in the 1930s to back it up. Who doesn't love their own theory? The document is called the Piri Reis Map, and it's mysterious even today for its unusual depiction of Antarctica. Even though the map was drawn in 1513, it shows Antarctica as being completely free of ice, a vast territory of dry land. This is 100% impossible, unless there is something mainstream scientists have gotten very wrong. The only way Antarctica was free of ice 500 years ago, or even 12,000 years ago, is if scientists have made a very serious mistake. And while unlikely, it's not entirely impossible. Charles believed the Piri Reis map was proof enough that Antarctica moved from way higher up in the Atlantic Ocean to settle at the South Pole. He believed the Piri Reis map was based on even older maps from when early civilizations visited Antarctica. And now here comes one of the most bizarre parts of this theory. Some believe that Charles was correct, and that Antarctica was home to the lost civilization of Atlantis. According to the Greek philosopher Plato, who wrote of Atlantis in 359 BC, Antarctica was destroyed about 11,000 years ago. The mighty civilization was the most prosperous and the most technologically advanced in the world. But based on what Plato wrote, they were destroyed by floods and earthquakes after attempting to enslave the people of Europe and Asia. And these natural disasters supposedly caused their city to sink far beneath the waves. Plato's description for Atlantis' location places it in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, allegedly right where Antarctica was 12,000 years ago. The description of Atlantis fits directly with Charles Hapgood's theory of pole shift. Maybe Atlantis never sank, it just moved to the South Pole, and now the city is hidden under over a mile of solid ice. I don't know about you, but I don't think an old map is enough proof of anything. Let me know what you think in the comments. A giant footprint. In a remote forest in Alaska, a monumental footprint was discovered. It happened in Katmai National Park, a vast wilderness still covered in ice and snow. The park surrounds the legendary Aniak Chak volcano, which, according to experts, could erupt at any second. The volcano is estimated to be about 3,700 years old and could be preparing for a massive eruption. In February of 2023, earthquake activity caused scientists to increase the volcano alert level in anticipation of a potential explosion. The last major one was 3 millennia ago, so we're definitely overdue. If this thing blows its top, the heat and lava will make quick work of whatever ice is left in Katmai National Park. But we're not here to talk about a potential volcanic eruption that could spew ash into the sky and block out the sun, causing famine across the entire globe. We're here because park rangers found a huge footprint smushed into a rock amidst 600,000 acres of frozen wilderness. This is one of the least explored places in Alaska, and yet keen-eyed rangers came across the footprint, which turned out out to be from a Tyrannosaurus rex. According to what the national park said in a tweet, they already knew dinosaurs roamed this part of Alaska millions of years ago. However, the footprint is the first evidence of a T-Rex living here, and that's a big deal. They have never found any T-Rex bones in the area, but now they have a giant footprint. It's hard to imagine today, but for almost 40 million years, give or take a few centuries, Alaska was dominated by the T-Rex. They lived all across North America from the late Cretaceous, starting 100 million years ago, up until the asteroid impact that occurred 66 million years ago. The Tyrannosaurus rex could grow to be about 40 feet long. It stomped around on two heavy legs, and it had a bite that could put a trash compactor to shame. The T-Rex had 60 serrated teeth, each one bigger than a banana, and it weighed around 15,000 pounds. It's shout-out time! I want to give a big thank you to Mystic Mo and NC Hiker 1970 for supporting this channel. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos about amazing discoveries. Primate relatives. In Canada's high Arctic, a new species has been discovered. According to researchers from the University of Kansas, Canada was once home to extremely early primate relatives. These tiny ancient primates evolved to deal with the hardships of living in the northern reaches of the world. They were in a warm, fairly temperate environment on what is now Ellesmere Island, where they survived 6 months of total darkness in the winter and then 6 months of unbearable brightness. This was 52 million years ago in the Eocene epoch. It was a time of intense warmth, when just about every part of the planet was way hotter than it is today. Researchers have found plenty of fossils on Ellesmere Island, with all the remains pointing to a rich, moist, and swampy environment. But the primate relative is one of the most unique things discovered on the island, because technically, humans are all primates too. This is currently the first primate relative ever discovered this far north. In truth, the team discovered 2 new species of primate, but they're extremely similar. One is named Ignatius dawsonii, and the other is Ignatius mckinney. Based on fragments from their jaws and teeth, researchers were able to compare them to other early primates from farther south. And just like you'd expect from any Arctic animal, even in a period of great warmth, they had unique adaptations. Both ancient primates were fairly big, and their teeth were used for crunching hard food. They were also better suited to living in the darkness. They had traits that would have allowed them to more easily scavenge for food during the long dark of the Arctic winter. Scientists think this is good news for any potential global warming in the future. The discovery of the first primate fossils north of the Arctic Circle proves that even with a little bit of warmth, animals can flourish in the North Pole. Although the Arctic is currently a cold and inhospitable tundra, it could be home to primates again in another million years. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. Do you think you could live in darkness for 6 months? The fish lizard. There were ancient fish lizards swimming throughout the world's oceans 250 million years ago. A recent new study based on some bizarre fossils recovered on a remote Arctic island shows these strange fish lizards evolved long before scientists previously thought. Researchers found the fossilized remains of an ichthyosaur on the Arctic island of Spitsbergen in 2014. This particular stretch of isolated Arctic wilderness is in the Svalbard archipelago in Norway. The ichthyosaur was an exceptionally weird animal that looked an awful lot like a modern dolphin or a toothed whale, but it also resembled a giant lizard. The remains were found trapped in a limestone boulder on the icy terrain. It's now believed to be the oldest ichthyosaur skeleton dating back to the early Triassic period. This is a big discovery for many reasons. To start, it's not every day an ancient fish lizard is discovered frozen in the Arctic, and scientists previously assumed ichthyosaurs evolved at the same time as other marine reptiles after the Permian extinction event that occurred around 251.9 million years ago. This event was also known as the Great Dying and resulted in about 90% of all life forms being obliterated. Up until now, the oldest marine reptile fossil was from 249 million years ago, suggesting this type of animal emerged after the cataclysmic event. But with this new ichthyosaur skeleton, we know that wasn't true. These things were around before the Permian extinction. We just don't have any other evidence of them. It makes you wonder what other horrifying animals lived in the ancient past that we have absolutely no record of. Lost Mongolia. The ice in Mongolia is melting so quickly, scientists are having a hard time cataloging all the artifacts being revealed across the vast, mushy landscape. Disappearing ice patches are uncovering artifacts that have been unseen for centuries, which has been both a blessing and a curse for eager archaeologists. There's just so many all at the same time. The retreating ice and evaporating snow has revealed lost textiles, forgotten tools, and even ancient mummies that have been hidden for thousands of years. But if the archaeologists aren't on top of the melt, these treasures can be exposed to the elements for the first time, which would cause them to rot. It doesn't take long for a body previously frozen in ice to decompose once exposed to the blazing sun. There's also an issue with hikers and tourists picking up lost relics as they hike through the warming mountains. In 2018, William Taylor from the Max Planck Institute for the Science of Human History took a team to Mongolia to search for artifacts. As they surveyed the declining ice patches, they found a lot of great stuff. They uncovered animal bodies, arrowheads, and other artifacts. They even found some things that could provide insight into the original domestication of reindeer. But on the flip side, William said he was shocked at the extent of the melting. Their investigation took them to the rugged tundra in Mongolia's north, near the border with Russia. Speaking with locals, the team learned that in just the past few years, the ice started melting uncontrollably. The next summer, when they moved west and began searching the icy peaks of the Altai Mountains, they found even more artifacts. In the melting ice there, they discovered more animal carcasses, projectiles, sharpened wooden sticks, and evidence of early sheep and goat herding. Most of the artifacts are over 3,000 years old and have only now been released from their icy prisons. The Mongolian wilderness might seem barren, but it was an extremely important part of history. The Silk Road ran through here on its way to Europe and Central Asia, and these frozen expanses of tundra were home to the armies of Genghis Khan in the 13th century. The Altai Mountains were also inhabited by some of the earliest herders in this part of the world. A lot of this history is currently buried under the ice, but will be revealed as the temperature continues to increase. The evolution of the mammoth. Researchers from Sweden recently compared the genomes of 23 woolly mammoths, and surprisingly, they found that they weren't always shaggy and hairy creatures. These ancient beasts were recovered from the Siberian permafrost, taken from various places in Russia. The Swedish researchers then compared the genomes from the Siberian mammoths to the genomes of modern Asian and African elephants. What they discovered was that over the 700,000 years that the woolly mammoth thrived, it evolved a lot. Lead author on the study, David Diaz del Molino, said he and the team wanted to know what set apart the woolly mammoth from other elephants, not just superficially, but at a molecular level. They found that the earliest woolly mammoths shared 91.7% of DNA mutations with the woolly mammoths almost a million years later. However, they did identify some major differences. The most recent woolly mammoths had evolved dry earwax and far less body odor. They also had massive fat storage, just like modern polar bears and reindeer. They did start out with a bit of hair when they first diverged from the steppe mammoth, but they didn't become shaggy and extra thick until much later. Researchers believe these particular traits are a distinct part of being an Arctic animal. Reindeer, polar bears, Arctic wolves, and other cold climate animals all share these traits. To put it as simply as possible, the longer an animal survives in a cold climate, the shaggier and more well-adapted they get. What other bizarre ancient creatures do you think could be hiding under the ice? Let me know in the comments below, and while you're at it, be sure to subscribe. Fossilized fur ball. Miners in Canada discovered a mysterious lump in the frozen north a few years ago in 2018. The lump was tan in color and was about the size of a grapefruit, and it kind of looked like a fur ball. The miners were smart enough to keep the mysterious mass of gunk and pass it along to scientists. And as it turned out, the mysterious blob really was a fur ball, a tangled mass of claws, limbs, and hair. It took paleontologists 5 years of studying the thing to realize what it was. But now they've identified the fur ball as a compressed squirrel from the Ice Age. It's a perfectly preserved Arctic ground squirrel, to be exact. This animal lived alongside woolly mammoths and saber-toothed cats 30,000 years ago. Although the specimen is in an amazing state of preservation, it's still squished. The creature is a mummy, curled into a tight ball because it likely perished in the middle of hibernation. The poor squirrel was trying to sleep for the winter when something caused it to pass away. Its name is now Hester, named after Hester Creek in the Yukon, where the creature was found in Canada's Klondike goldfields. If you're confused as to how a squirrel can remain preserved for so long after death, it's because it was trapped in the ice for so long. This is in the frigid northern region of Canada, where there are likely thousands of Ice Age animals still trapped in the permafrost. This particular specimen just happened to get dislodged by the miners as they broke through the earth. But there are a lot more, maybe even creatures we haven't heard of yet, frozen under Canada's perpetual ice. Some other recent discoveries in the Yukon include giant beavers, a baby mammoth, and a prehistoric wolf puppy. The squirrel will soon be put on display in Whitehorse. The new exhibits this year will include the Ice Age squirrel and the preserved remains of a black-footed ferret that was also found in the Yukon. In case you're wondering, the Arctic ground squirrel never went extinct. This squirrel is still alive today, living in parts of the Yukon and Alaska. These small mammals are basically invincible, almost like cockroaches. Even if the climate changes dramatically or we have nuclear war and everything else dies, these hardy ground squirrels hopefully will continue to thrive. A giant meteorite. During a recent expedition to Antarctica, researchers rounded up 5 meteorites. There's nothing particularly unusual about it, seeing as Antarctica is one of the best places in the world to find meteorites, but one of these specimens has proved to be something of an anomaly. It looks like it could be the biggest meteorite ever recovered in Antarctica. But why in the world is Antarctica so great for meteorite hunting? In a nutshell, it has to do with all the snow and ice. When a dark black and gray rock falls from the sky and smashes into a thick layer of ice or a field of pale white snow, it's easy for scientists to spot. The whole process is way easier than most people think. Hunting for meteorites involves walking around looking for black rocks in the distance while cruising around on a snowmobile. The pure white ice is the ideal setting for meteorite hunting, and it's about as complex as looking for Easter eggs. But most of the meteorites they find are small, maybe about the size of a fist, or even smaller. This newest meteorite, however, is the size of a cantaloupe. It weighs a whopping 17 pounds, which is a big deal for a piece of space debris. There are only about 100 other specimens that can compare, and that's out of the roughly 45,000 that have been collected already in Antarctica. The large piece of space junk was taken to the Royal Belgian Institute of Natural Sciences in Brussels, and from there will undergo a series of tests. Maria Valdez, who was on the expedition team, was lucky enough to keep a small bit of its material for her own investigations. Even with just a few scrapes from a meteorite, Maria is hoping to get a glimpse into the evolution of the solar system. The elements hidden inside these space rocks are part of the very fabric of space and time. They may just seem like rocks, but these extraterrestrial deposits contain the very ingredients for life itself. Salt ice in space. Scientists have made some interesting discoveries about ice that isn't from our home planet. Satellite images have revealed some salty ice patches on one of Jupiter's most famous moons. It's the smallest out of Jupiter's 4 orbiting satellites, and it's called Europa. Satellite images show a chaotic network of reddish-orange streaks on Europa's surface. Scientists think the streaks are like solidified rivers of water and salt, although they don't know what the chemical signature might be. But what's so amazing about this is that they don't think we have any comparable substances on Earth. It was a research team from the University of Washington who turned their sights to Europa. They think the salty ice with a creepy red hue is a type of solid crystal forming only when water and ordinary salt combine under incredible circumstances. Water and salt, in addition to extreme cold and high pressures, might result in a totally new type of salty ice. And it's not just on Europa. Scientists think the white streaks seen across the surface of Jupiter's largest moon, Ganymede, are also patches of this salt ice. It's all very exciting because if this is a new type of material, it's found nowhere on our own planet. Scientists think it could be at the very bottom of the deepest parts of the ocean, but otherwise, they'll have to try and recreate it in a lab. Treasure in the Alps. Following a brutally hot summer in Switzerland, archaeologists found a small stash of artifacts melting on glaciers high up in the Alps. Archaeologists were investigating the frozen passageways near the top of Lotschen Pass when they made the discovery. This was an ancient travel route used by early humans for thousands of years. Those who needed to travel from the Bernese Oberland to the Valais region often did so by fighting through the mountains and taking the high passes. This was a treacherous journey, and not everyone survived, but it was better than walking around the entirety of the Swiss Alps. As people moved along this ancient trading route, they occasionally dropped their belongings. Now that the summers are so hot, archaeologists have been able to recover lost items from thousands of years ago. Most recently, they found a bow, a wooden box, and a bag. All three items were dated to about 2000 BC, meaning they were made during the Bronze Age. The bag is particularly interesting because it was crafted using two large pieces of birch bark. The two flat pieces of bark were sewn along their edges to create a simple traveling bag. However, nobody has any idea what the bag was used for, so you can use your imagination. The Ape Woman. Professor Brian Sykes from the University of Oxford recently made an astounding claim. He says a woman from 19th century Russia named Zana could be the origin for the story of the Yeti. And that's because Zana was an ape woman. She stood nearly 7 feet tall and was found living in the mountains near the border of Georgia and Russia. According to the original reports, Zana was captured by a local merchant in the 1850s after she was spotted trudging through the mountains. People were terrified of her because she was huge and had all the characteristics of a wild animal. She was also covered in thick reddish hair. She looked exactly like what some say the Yeti looks like now. Zana was kept as a prisoner like a wild animal, then was sold to a local nobleman named Edgi Ginaba. She reportedly gave birth in captivity to at least 4 children fathered by unknown men. Brian Sykes says it's possible that her children could still live in the region. Her descendants might be the very real Yeti that people continue to spot in Siberia to this day. Interestingly, Brian says Zana may not have been entirely human. He believes, based on eyewitness testimonies, that Zana really was a wild beast and that she came from an unknown line of humanoid animals from Africa. She may have been a kind of primitive human species, not unlike the Neanderthal, that miraculously survived in Siberia until the 19th century. And so the alleged Yeti could just be the descendants of the world's last ape woman. What do you think about this theory? Let me know in the comments. Ancient parasite. Not all of these strange creatures found in Siberia are big. Scientists recently discovered a microscopic organism that's been thriving in Siberia for billions of years. The worm-like creatures have been alive in the permafrost for 24,000 years and are still functioning normally today. Russian scientists found the tiny animal, which is called a bedeloid rotifer, in soil near the Alizaya River in Yakutia. This multicellular organism, a glorified microscopic worm, is known for living in freshwater habitats across the globe. It's particularly famous for its ability to withstand extreme conditions. Previous research showed these worms can live for up to 10 years when frozen. But this one, taken from over 10 feet underground, has been alive for a total of 24,485 years, encased in solid permafrost. The tiny creatures aren't just resistant to the cold, they can also resist radiation. They don't mind being dried or starved, and they don't really need much oxygen either. They live everywhere from clumps of moss to tree bark and can also be found at the bottom of ponds and streams. They have nothing but a mouth, a digestive tract, and a hole on the other end to excrete their waste. It might not be an exciting creature, but those are the 3 things that constitute a living animal. These things can eat and hibernate to arrest their metabolism. And amazingly, they can survive for tens of thousands of years in a limbo between life and death. The monster in the lake. Lake Labinkir in Siberia has been the epicenter for strange stories of a mysterious underwater creature for centuries. Some have even called the unidentified beast the Loch Ness Monster of Siberia. The lake is a mystery in its own right. While most lakes in Siberia freeze throughout the long and bitter winter, Lake Labinkir does not. It maintains a constant temperature of 36 degrees Fahrenheit at the surface. Modern scientists think there could be an underground hot spring secretly warming the lake. But in ancient times, locals believed the body of water had magic properties. And so, it's no surprise that they started telling stories of a creature residing within the lake. The mysterious creature is said to be about the size of an orca whale. Some have described it as a prehistoric shark, like a megalodon, except it's supposedly only 25 feet long. Others say it has a long neck like a snake and a fat body like a marine reptile from prehistoric days. Recently, though, a Russian research team from the Russian Geographical Society found the skeletal remains of an unknown animal in the lake. The team geologists said nobody's really sure what the animal is yet because they weren't able to recover the physical remains. They were using an underwater scanner when they came across the jawbone and skeleton of something unknown. But because of the intense depths of the lake, the team wasn't able to bring the remains to the surface. It does appear that something horrifying has been living in the lake, but we still don't know what it was. The extinct unicorn. There was once a unicorn living in Siberia. In fact, the Siberian unicorn lived alongside early humans in the Eurasian steppes of Siberia and Central Asia. Scientists recently discovered a fossilized skull in Kazakhstan belonging to Elasmotherium sibericum. This animal was believed to have gone extinct 350,000 years ago. But when scientists did carbon dating tests, they concluded the fossil came from 29,000 years ago. That means the Siberian unicorn was living at a time when early humans were spreading throughout the region, hunting and painting things on cave walls. But what in the world did the real-life unicorn look like? Well, in all honesty, it was kind of terrifying. It wasn't a beautiful white stallion with a horn of gold sprouting from its forehead. It looked more like a shaggy rhinoceros that stood almost 6 feet tall and weighed 4 tons. Just like the woolly rhino and woolly mammoth, it was covered in a coat of scruffy hair. And just like the mythical unicorn, it had a horn growing from the top of its head. One of the scientists involved in the investigation of the fossil, Andrei Shapansky, thinks he knows what happened. He says that Western Siberia was likely a refuge in prehistoric times where the unicorn could thrive. While its friends were dying everywhere else in the world, there was a small sanctuary in Siberia where the unicorns ran free. It's shout-out time! I want to say a big thank you to Shelly7770H and Destiny Duelist 92 for supporting this channel. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already for more videos about amazing discoveries, or dinosaurs, or terrifying creatures in Siberia, the alien in the snow. There's been a video circulating for many years now of a dead alien being found in the snow by a pair of Russian men. The clip appears to be legitimate on the surface. The footage is terrible and blurry and was clearly shot using an old cell phone. The video shows 2 Russian men coming upon a dead creature lying near a tree that's partially covered in snow. This is outside the Siberian city of Irkutsk. The creature is definitely supposed to be an alien. It's about 3 feet tall and has a huge head. The alleged extraterrestrial also has gangly limbs and deep black eye sockets. But is this real proof of an alien being in Russia? Most experts are doubtful about its authenticity. They think the whole thing was staged, although it's hard to say why someone would fake such a video so many years ago. The clip is also clearly shot in what appears to be a rural part of Russia. This is somewhere you wouldn't expect ordinary citizens to have fake gelatin aliens on hand. Experts suggest that the extraterrestrial was made using animal parts from a butcher shop. But that doesn't explain how it got its translucent skin. If you watch the video closely, the alien appears to have the proper anatomy for a humanoid organism. In the end, though, there is just no real way of knowing if the alien is real or if it was just a prop. If it was real, we can only wonder what the 2 men did with it after they found it, the skeleton of a monster. A coastal survey team in Russia's Kamchatka territory uncovered the skeletal remains of a headless sea monster. The huge skeleton is one of the very few vestiges found of a creature called the Steller's sea cow. These giants of the deep lived all across the globe during the Pleistocene epoch, but their range had greatly fallen by the time they were found by European explorers in 1741. At that point, they lived only around the Bering Sea, and once the explorers found them, they hunted them down. The stellar sea cow was so big that just one kill could feed an entire ship's crew for at least a month. Also, fat extracted from the animal could be used as a substitute for butter. But sadly, 27 years after the stellar sea cow was discovered, it went extinct. The creature was, in all honesty, a gentle giant. It may have been huge and terrifying, but it wasn't a ruthless predator. It was more like a manatee, growing 30 feet long and weighing over 10 tons. The newly discovered skeleton may have been the remains of somebody's discarded meal. Researchers excavated 27 ribs, 45 vertebrae, and a small collection of other bones. But because the skeleton is missing its skull, researchers are wondering if it wasn't taken by a seafarer as an oddity to hang on his mantle. The Yeti. Russian researchers looking for the legendary Yeti, the Asian version of Bigfoot, recently made an outrageous claim. They said they had found indisputable proof of the Yeti living in Siberia. The evidence came in the form of strands of hair and tracks stomped in the snow. The research team says it's enough to make them 95% sure that somewhere out in the icy landscape of Siberia, there's a Yeti. Better yet, there's likely a bunch of Yetis, since they would need to procreate. The Yeti is a muscular creature covered in reddish-brown hair that weighs up to 400 pounds. But unlike its North American counterpart, Bigfoot, the Yeti is only about 6 feet tall. Curious explorers and zoologists have been searching for proof of the monster for decades. Expeditions have been undertaken into the remote mountains of Nepal and into the deep snowfields of Siberia, and all to no avail. One of the most famous missions was conducted by mountaineer Reinhold Messner. He stayed up in the mountains of Nepal and Tibet for months, looking for the Yeti based on his own sighting. But at the end of it all, Messner admitted that it was just mountain bears leaving behind huge tracks in the snow. Back in Siberia, the Russian researchers said they found the Yeti's hair in a cave in western Siberia. They also found its footprints and a place where the Yeti was sleeping. However, despite all their big talk, the researchers never got a photo of the Yeti, and they didn't capture it alive. They didn't have anything to offer as conclusive proof of its existence. Sure, the Yeti might be out there, but just like Bigfoot, nobody's ever managed to get a decent photo of it. What do you think? Do you believe Bigfoot or the Yeti are out there? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. The fierce cave lion. In the Siberian Arctic, the remains of a cave lion cub were recently discovered frozen in the permafrost. The cave lion cub wasn't exactly the most ferocious of beasts during its life, but it certainly would have been if it ever had the chance to grow to adulthood. When this animal died 28,000 years ago, its feline friends ruled the Siberian tundra. The Eurasian cave lion genetically separated from the ordinary lion about 1.9 million years ago. It then went extinct at the same time as animals like the woolly mammoth 13,000 years ago. It was one of the most terrifying predators in Siberia during the Ice Age. A fully grown adult male had a shoulder height of about 4 feet, with a body length of 7 feet. Just its footprints alone were 6 inches across. The heaviest of these cave lions could weigh almost 800 pounds, making it more dangerous than modern lions and roughly 12% larger. The only thing deadlier than the Eurasian cave lion was the American lion that lived at the same time. The newly uncovered Siberian cub is one of the best preserved examples of a Eurasian cave lion. Because of the ice, its golden fur was perfectly preserved, still matted with mud. Researchers were able to look at its teeth, organs, and claws. And according to them, the cub's claws are still sharp enough to kill. Bergman's bear. These days, the Kamchatka brown bear is the largest brown bear found in Eurasia. It's a positively beastly creature that can stand nearly 10 feet tall on its hind legs. One of these bears weighs upwards of 1,450 pounds. That makes it equivalent to the Kodiak bear found in Alaska, except the Kamchatka brown bear lives on Russia's Kamchatka Peninsula. However, there may have once been a much larger bear that lived here. In 1920, Swedish zoologist Sten Bergman identified a subspecies of brown bear that was much larger than any currently living species. Bergman found a fur hide that was bigger than anything found in the region before. He named the bear after himself, Bergman's bear, and claimed it was a very real monster that had recently gone extinct. Bergman's claim was backed up by ancient native folklore. The indigenous Siberians told stories of a beast called Irkuyem, or the god bear. This was supposedly a great bear that was much larger than a man and could stand 15 feet on its back legs. By all accounts, there were once giant bears of unprecedented proportions living in Siberia, but now there is no evidence of them, not so much as a skull frozen in the ice. These days, nobody knows what happened to these monstrous bears, or if they ever truly existed at all. Creepy mummy. At a Siberian diamond mine, workers dug up an ancient creature that they say looks like some type of mummified demon spawn. The diamond mine is located in Udachny, in Siberia's Sakha Republic. The diamond miners who unearthed the creature believe it's a previously unknown kind of dinosaur. However, scientific experts aren't as certain. The mummified monster might just be none other than the remains of a wolverine, a predatory carnivore that sort of looks like a small bear. The thing about the creature is that it was found in material that dates back to the Mesozoic era, between 252 and 66 million years ago. Mining operations have been going on here since the 1960s. There was even an atomic bomb detonated in 1974 to create a bigger underground cavern, which is where the mummified remains of the creature were found. This led many to argue that it couldn't possibly be a wolverine. The physical features of the creature do make it fairly easy to identify. Scientists have looked at it and have said it's likely a mammal belonging to the Mustelidae family. It could be a wolverine, a ferret, or some other kind of small weasel. Experts don't think the creature is as old as the sediment it was found in, but the diamond miners are still convinced they have the corpse of a demon spawn, or perhaps an entirely species of dinosaur. Which of these discoveries do you think has the potential to truly change history? Let me know in the comments, and thanks for watching! Hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for more discoveries coming right up! Prehistoric sea monster. A truly terrifying creature was recently discovered far north in the Atlantic Ocean, in the frozen island group of Svalbard, a place where the land is covered in ice. Scientists identified the fossilized remains of a prehistoric sea monster. This thing had jaws so big and so powerful it could have easily eaten modern killer whales for breakfast. Its flippers were so large they looked like airplane wings. The ancient predator was 45 feet from the tip of its snout to the end of its tail, maybe even bigger. Scientists have nicknamed the long-extinct animal the monster. After the fossilized remains were extracted from the frozen rock, they were taken to the Natural History Museum at the University of Oslo. There, researchers tested the bones and made all their scientific observations. They finally confirmed that the animal lived in the Jurassic period 150 million years ago. It was a marine reptile, perhaps one of the biggest to ever roam the seas. Curator of the museum, Patrick Drunkenmiller, called it one of the largest plesiosaur specimens ever found. The plesiosaur was the most dangerous ocean predator of their time. It had a body kind of like a teardrop and propelled itself through the water using 2 pairs of monstrous flippers. They ate fish, squid, and even their own relatives. They would gobble up pretty much anything they could, whenever they could. What's especially interesting about this particular species is that it was found 800 miles from the North Pole. Researchers excavated the remains in the summer, during the short window before winter made the region impossible to navigate. The presence of such beasts so close to the North Pole proves that during prehistoric times, things were a lot warmer. Things were so warm, there was likely no ice here at all. Alien technology in the Arctic. Ufologists have made some pretty outlandish claims recently. It appears the Russian army may have discovered secret alien technology buried underneath the Arctic. Russian military personnel allegedly had unusual encounters near the North Pole. Officers picked up signals while performing covert missions for the government. Captain Prikhotko, the leader of recent Russian Arctic operations, allegedly witnessed unidentified objects moving freely beneath the Antarctic ice during reconnaissance. These objects were like highly advanced submarines. The captain believed them to be from aliens because no modern technology can attain such speeds while under solid ice. The captain also claimed that his entire platoon witnessed these strange objects, corroborating his story. It's difficult to say how much of this story is true. Prikhotko may be making the whole thing up, or he really did witness something unimaginable. At this point, all we have for proof is the captain's word and the reports from ufologists who believe it. Do you believe the captain's story? Tell me in the comments and be sure to subscribe while you're at it. Icy microbes. While investigating glaciers on the Tibetan Plateau, scientists discovered never-before-seen microbes. They came across over 900 species of microbes trapped inside the ice that science never even knew about. Recent analysis of the new discovery has shown many have the potential to create fresh global pandemics. If the ice continues melting, these microbes could be released from their cold prisons to wreak havoc on human society. The ice samples were taken from 21 glaciers by researchers working with the Chinese Academy of Sciences. The Tibetan Plateau is a region in Asia located between the high peaks of the Himalayan mountains and the Taklamakan Desert. The research team looked at the genomes of the microscopic organisms locked inside the ice samples. These samples included mostly bacteria, but also some types of fungi and algae. It came as a big surprise when 98% of the species were totally new to science. Nobody had expected such a huge level of microbial diversity. It was shocking that such a large assortment of dormant microbes could be hiding in blocks of ice so close to melting. When the ice melts, it flows into the ground, into rivers, and ends up being ingested by animals and people. We don't know how old the microbes are. Some appear to have been in the ice for about 10,000 years. Given the rate at which the planet appears to be warming, it might not be long before all the ice in the mountains of Tibet melts, releasing thousands of potentially dangerous microbes into the environment. Big shout out to Brandy and Julian Banda. Thanks so much for watching and supporting Origins Explained. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe and join the family. We'd love to have you. Whalebone mask. The Aleutian Islands of Alaska are located between Russia and Alaska in the frigid north of our planet. The islands have 57 volcanoes, making them the northernmost part of the Pacific Ocean's ring of fire. They have some shocking geography, but also some shocking ancient history. Early humans have been living here since the very first man and woman crossed the Bering Strait into North America. Scientists even believe that some of the earliest human settlements here were submerged by rising waters at the end of the Ice Age. When Russian explorers and traders began arriving in the 18th century, the indigenous population took a beating. Many were forced to become Christians and forsake their ancient traditions. People had been living here for thousands of years, hunting, fishing, and thriving, despite the brutally cold temperature. Then Europeans came and suddenly their way of life was disrupted. But every now and again, researchers find some small piece of prehistory in the islands. One of the most unusual recent discoveries was a whalebone mask excavated from a settlement 3,000 years old. Plenty of wooden masks have been found throughout coastal Alaska, but bone is extremely rare. Nobody knows what exactly the mask was used for, but best guess it likely played an important role in a ritual ceremony. Mummified bear. Yet another terrifying beast from prehistory has been found frozen in the Siberian permafrost. This time, it's a mummified brown bear, one that lived about 3,500 years ago. It was discovered in February of 2023, and so scientists are still busy trying to conduct an autopsy to find out more about the bear's last days on Earth. The remains were found by some local deer herders on Bolshoy-Lyakovsky Island. The body parts were already fossilized because they had been stuck in the permafrost for thousands of years, like a piece of meat stuck in an eternal freezer. Maxim Cheprasov from the Lazarev Mammoth Museum Laboratory in Siberia used the opportunity to study the internal organs and brain of the ancient animal. Scientists learned it was a female, measuring only about 5 feet tall and weighing little more than 170 pounds. This was a far cry from many of the scariest prehistoric bears that went extinct after the Ice Age. The truth is that it was the bear's small stature that likely allowed it to survive the end of the Ice Age. It was smaller and didn't need as much food as the much larger animals, and was able to secure itself a stable place in the environment. Researchers believe this particular brown bear died from a spinal injury between the ages of 2 and 3. Otzi's axe. 5,350 years ago, give or take a few years, a man took a journey high into the mountains along the border of Italy and Austria. This individual was wounded by an arrow to his left shoulder, and he had been in a physical altercation shortly before. Scientists believe he fled his attackers and tried to escape. Unfortunately for this prehistoric man, he didn't make it very far. He died in those mountains. He was frozen in the snow and remained a human icicle until he was discovered in 1991 by some hikers. They thought he was a recently deceased mountaineer, totally oblivious they had just found a frozen caveman. The caveman became known as Otzi because he was discovered in the Otzal Alps. In the years since he was found, Otzi has helped scientists learn things about prehistory that would have otherwise been impossible. But let's forget about Otzi himself for a minute. Archaeologists also found a copper axe with a wooden handle lying near him. This was his melee weapon, found alongside some arrow shafts that had yet to be fitted with flint tips. The copper used to craft the axe came from southern Tuscany. It shows obvious signs of wear, meaning it got used a lot for cutting and chopping. But this wasn't just a weapon and a tool, it was also a status symbol. Prehistoric humans often didn't walk around with such impressive artifacts. This thing is proof that he had a high station in life. Otzi's axe was a luxury item. It would be like finding someone dead in the street with a Rolex. He must have had some serious wealth. But this only adds to the mystery of what Otzi was doing in the Otzal Alps. We still don't know who he was running from, or why he risked freezing to death. Antarctic ice and Martian soil. Researchers have discovered a mineral in an ice core sample taken from Antarctica. This mineral is important because it's a fairly common ingredient found in Martian soil. The mineral is a substance called jarosite, and it's been identified on both Earth and on Mars. Finding it trapped in Antarctic ice is a huge step in learning more about Mars for one main reason. Jarosite is created when dust gets trapped inside an ice deposit and slowly breaks down. What this means is that since the mineral was found on Mars, Mars must have at one point had huge icy glaciers. If there was water on Mars once, there could still be water there now. This supports the theory that underneath the surface of the red planet are frozen lakes and oceans. Jarosite was found on Mars for the first time in 2004 by NASA. It made headlines back then because scientists already knew jarosite requires water to form. And now the same mineral has been found deep within the Antarctic ice. This was a place nobody expected to find it, since previously jarosite has mostly been found in piles of mining waste. It's been taken from deep inside the earth and then dumped out in the trash during mining operations. Only a few specks of the substance were found in Antarctica, pieces smaller than an eyelash or even a grain of sand. But that's only because Antarctica isn't very dusty. Mars, on the other hand, is covered in dust. It explains why jarosite has been so easy to find on Mars. A pyramid in Antarctica. There is a mountain in Antarctica that looks suspiciously like a pyramid. It could be the most famous mountain on the internet, with countless theories trying to explain its origins. Some believe the mountain is in reality an artificial pyramid left behind by a prehistoric civilization. These theories claim the mountain is only the tip of a much larger pyramid, one whose body is hidden under hundreds of feet of ice and snow. Others speculate the pyramid was created by aliens, and that it was used as a giant battery focusing the natural energies of the Earth to power their spaceships. This theory may sound outrageous, but you just never know. There are enough mysteries in this world that we shouldn't dismiss the possibility of a lost civilization covered in ice. After all, explorers only found Antarctica a little more than a century ago. But not everyone believes the hype. Professor of Earth System Science Eric Rignot says the mountain is just a mountain. He says many mountain peaks look like pyramids. It's not that big of a deal. The mountain, which doesn't have a formal name, is part of the Ellsworth Mountains. They were found by Lincoln Ellsworth in 1935. And to be entirely fair, a lot of the mountains do kind of look like pyramids. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. Ancient ice skating. Human beings have been gliding over frozen waters for at least 5,000 years. Scientists have found evidence of ancient ice skating in Scandinavia and Russia going back to the end of the Stone Age. It's believed the very first manufacturers of ice skates were people living in Finland. Finland happens to have more frozen lakes than any other part of the world, so it makes sense that people needed a way to cross them in the winter. Using ice skates would have saved at least 10% of a person's energy compared to walking. And in prehistoric times, speed and convenience was a big deal. There is an ancient set of ice skates on display at the Museum of London that were made from solid bone. This was the norm up until 1250 when the Dutch created metal skates. Then, by around the 15th century, skating had become a recreational activity. The world's first skating club was introduced in Scotland in 1742. The first official speed skating event was held in 1863 in Norway. Although it is important to note that starting around 960 AD during the Song dynasty, ruling families in China also started ice skating for fun. The only baby rhino. The only baby woolly rhinoceros in the world is named Sasha. This creature was discovered frozen in the Siberian permafrost in 2014. Just a few years later, the well-preserved prehistoric youngster was embalmed and put on display in Moscow. It is by far one of the most incredible Ice Age animals literally encased in ice that's ever been found. Sasha was born in what is now the Siberian region of Yakutia 34,000 years ago. Even after all these years, Sasha still has its thick, curly, strawberry blonde hair. Aside from the horn, it wouldn't have looked much different from the modern rhinos we see in Africa. According to the scientists who analyzed its teeth, Sasha was only 7 months old when it died. Yet despite being only 7 months old, it was the same size as a modern 18-month-old African rhinoceros. What this means is that the woolly rhinos of the Arctic tundra were significantly larger and more terrifying. At 7 months, it was already growing an impressive horn. But there is still a lot we don't know. Scientists weren't able to figure out if the rhino was a boy or a girl because the internal organs had already rotted. Still, after putting the ancient beast back together again, researchers were able to create the only authentic taxidermy of a baby woolly rhino. The terrible shrew. The Gargano Peninsula in Italy was home to a variety of strange, unusual, and particularly mean animals in prehistory. From about 33 to 5 million years ago, the island was riddled with gigantic animals that are now extinct. The island's inhabitants all seem to have suffered from insular gigantism. This is an exceptional phenomenon which occurs when animals become stuck on an isolated piece of land. It can also happen to animals that get stuck in a large lake. Because there is a lack of competition and predators in a smaller zone, it's easier for the residents to get bigger and meaner. For example, Deinogalerix messini, the terrible shrew. Researchers found the fossilized remains of Deinogalerix in Italy, on the island where it prospered for many millions of years. They described the fossil as gigantic and said the creature belonged to the subfamily of moon rats. Although it's been described as a terrible shrew, it was really a hairy, rat-like hedgehog relative, and the oldest of its kind ever discovered. The terrible shrew could grow to about 2 feet long. This obviously wouldn't have made it as terrifying as facing off against a towering T-Rex. Still, stumbling upon 6 or 7 giant hedgehog-shaped rats would be its own unique breed of fear. It looks like they filled an ecological void on the island when all the medium-sized predators vanished. Maybe there were prehistoric cats and dogs, but they disappeared once the island was cut off from the rest of Italy. This allowed these small, shrew-like animals to grow uninterrupted. Given the ridiculous reproductive rates of shrews, it probably didn't even take that long. They kept breeding, kept getting bigger, and probably had to resort to hunting their own smaller relatives. Without much food to eat, they had no choice but to be monstrous cannibals. The murder bird. Titanus was one of the biggest and scariest terror birds that ever lived. A frightening prehistoric bird unlike anything you could possibly imagine. It stood between 8 and 10 feet tall, weighed upwards of 300 pounds, and had a beak like a pickaxe. Titanus looked a lot more like its dinosaur relatives that went extinct 66 million years ago than any modern birds we have. It ran on 2 strong legs, had long talons, grasping claws, and a beak for ripping and tearing flesh. Even compared to the other dozens of species of terror birds that dominated the Earth after the dinosaurs, Titanus was truly something of a nightmare. It could easily outrun smaller animals, then bludgeon them to death with its beak like a solid steel baseball bat. This horrifying bird was so formidable, some paleontologists think it survived up until the end of the Pleistocene epoch, 15,000 years ago, even as other birds around it were dropping dead. Titanus was a descendant of the most powerful meat-eaters in South America, showing up in the fossil record about 60 million years ago. It vanished off the face of the planet between 2 million and a few thousand years ago, and in the time between had spread from South America all the way into Texas and South Florida. Even though it was a bird, it couldn't fly. You might want to compare it to an emu or an ostrich, but it wasn't even in the same weight class. It would have easily hunted ostriches and eaten them for dinner with its much more brutal killing mechanisms. Each of its 3 toes was equipped with a sharp talon like a meat hook, and its beak was shaped like a battle axe. Its closest relatives were other terror birds like Phorus racus and Kelenkin. But where Titanus really stood apart was its heavy frame. It was just a stronger bird with a thicker body structure, a wide neck, and so much more power. Why it even had wings at all is a subject of great debate. It had tiny wings that weren't good for anything, and were still kind of like arms. It had a wrist and small digits that could flex just a little bit, and it was extremely similar to raptors, only way bigger and way scarier. Big shout out to Joel Boyd. Thanks so much for watching and supporting Origins Explained. We wouldn't be here without you. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe and let us know what other videos you'd like to see in the comments below. The weird reptile. The Mesozoic era began 252 million years ago and ended with the extinction of the dinosaurs. During that massive stretch of time, many different kinds of animals evolved, prospered, and vanished. There were a lot of marine reptiles swimming in the world's oceans, and one of the strangest of them all was a creature called Dolichorhynchops. Hope I said that right. This weird marine reptile's fossils were discovered in Kansas in 1900. It was quickly identified as a plesiosaur, but with a short neck and stout frame. You might be familiar with plesiosaurs since they dominated the world's oceans for nearly 200 million years straight. They evolved into all types of different subspecies. Some had long necks, some had short necks, some were gigantic, and some were as small as dolphins. Dolichorhynchops was only about 10 feet long, but it was unique in that it had a jaw like an extremely long pair of needle-nose pliers. Its jaws were designed specifically for catching fish. Just imagine the long mouth of a crocodile, only narrower and filled with curved teeth. It snatched fish out of the water, then slid them down its mouth and swallowed them whole. Size was everything during the Mesozoic. Even an apex predator like the plesiosaur found itself inside the belly of other creatures. Researchers discovered the fossilized remains of a juvenile Dolichorhynchops inside the belly of a Tylosaurus fossil. Tylosaurus was another savage marine reptile, only it grew to over 45 feet in length and was a type of mosasaur, a prehistoric relative of modern-day monitor lizards. The big point to take away here is that if you lived in the prehistoric ocean, there was always a bigger fish. The bear dog. Amphision, better known as the bear dog, was one of the most frightening abominations that ever crawled out from the prehistoric jungle. It shared features of both modern bears and modern dogs, yet they weren't part of either family. They weren't bears, they weren't dogs, but were some scary mashup of both, classified as Caniformia. Oddly enough, this is the same modern suborder of animal that includes wolves, sea lions, and weasels. Based on the large number of fossils discovered, we know there were a few different types of bear dogs living between 58 and 23 million years ago. The first kind had long limbs, was a good runner, and looked a lot like a modern wolf. But again, it had bear features, like flat feet and extremely heavy bodies. The second kind was stocky, strong, and thick like a black bear. Some were so small that you could put them in a doggy backpack, while others grew to the size of grizzlies and were 1,000 pounds. According to Chicago's Field Museum, bear dogs likely started from a single species that was only the size of a chihuahua. Then, as they continued to evolve, they continued to grow and change. As they got bigger, they got scarier. But size has its disadvantages as well. As the bear dogs grew more powerful, they also needed more food to fuel their hulky bodies. This required more hunting and slower reproduction. Still, they were at the very top of the food chain. If you were to meet one of these monstrosities in the forest today, you would wish you'd stumbled upon a cougar's lair instead. The first bear dogs evolved in Eurasia, at a time when the Earth was much warmer than it is now. The average temperature around the entire globe was 86 degrees Fahrenheit. With all that heat and moisture, the world was covered in thick vegetation, and everything was big and hungry. It was only when the world started to cool down about 10 million years ago that the bear dogs found themselves running out of food to eat. They were too big. The sudden shift to a colder climate resulted in a serious loss of potential prey. This was why other animals took center stage, smaller creatures like wolves and black bears that could survive on less. If this prehistoric bear dog was still around today, would you be scared or would you want it as a pet? Let me know in the comments. The super croc. In Brazil, Colombia, Venezuela, and other parts of the Amazon, scientists have found the bones of a creature so scary it's hard to imagine such a thing existed. It was a semi-aquatic killing machine with a bite strength of about 7 tons. I'm talking about the Purosaurus, potentially the biggest crocodile that ever lived. It was discovered in 1892 by João Barbosa Rodrigues. Over a century later, scientists are still trying to figure out just how deadly this thing was. Based on all the fossil evidence we have, Purosaurus was somewhere around 40 feet in length. Just try to picture a crocodile the full size of a school bus weighing 8.4 tons and hungry. It was so big that it could chew up and swallow several of the biggest crocodiles we have today at the same time, like a handful of popcorn. Even though we know its size, there are still a lot of important details about the animal's biology we don't know. Scientists can't figure out exactly how Purosaurus used its immense weight and powerful jaws to kill, or how it digested its food. It was only recently that a team of scientists from Rio de Janeiro's Federal University started to study the colossal monster. They first confirmed that its head was about the same size as a modern caiman living in the Amazon. They also crunched some numbers and figured out Purosaurus needed around 88 pounds of food every day just to keep itself going. For comparison, that's nearly 20 times more food than the modern American alligator needs to survive. It also delivered 7 tons of sustained pressure when it snapped its jaws shut. That's a significantly stronger bite force than any Tyrannosaurus we know about. One of the research members, Aline M. Gilardi, explained both T-Rex and Purosaurus were apex predators at the very top of the food chain. They had absolutely no competition from other carnivores. It's not clear why Purosaurus went extinct. Most of its fossils are from 8 million years ago. It seems to have evolved quickly, exploded on the scene in South America, and then vanished just as fast. Its stupendous size was probably the cause of its decline after it ate all the available food. The giant hyena. Early hominids were most likely hunted by giant hyenas across the plains of Africa. The first of our great ancestors emerged in Ethiopia about 3.8 million years ago. Around the same time, the giant hyena was active. Homo sapiens only started to develop around 300,000 years ago, shortly after the giant hyenas went extinct. The data suggests that for nearly 3 million years, ridiculously huge hyenas prowled the same plains as our ancient ancestors. It's extremely likely that the weak, hairy hominids found themselves hunted by the giant predators. The giant hyena goes by the scientific name Pachycrocuta. It was a mega mammal that looked extremely similar to our modern spotted hyenas, only 3 times bigger. Each giant hyena could weigh up to 400 pounds, and they were ferocious. They had shorter legs than modern hyenas, were more muscled, and closer to the ground for better stability. Yet despite being huge and menacing, giant hyenas were still scavengers. Scientists believe they ate a staple diet of stolen prey that they took from smaller, less savvy predators. They may have occasionally hunted for their own food in large groups, maybe even tracking down a tribe of loincloth-wearing hominids, but more likely, they scavenged like massive land vultures. Fossils of Pachycrocuta have even been discovered in the same Chinese caves where archaeologists found the remains of Homo erectus. Homo erectus was our ancient ancestor, a species of human that evolved about 2 million years ago and had very similar traits to modern people. They didn't look quite as much like apes as the evolutionary variants that came before them. They had defined brows, human lips, and were very close to being Homo sapiens. Some scientists even believe they were the first upright walking humans. Finding the bones of a Homo erectus in a cave alongside giant hyena remains pretty much confirms that giant hyenas hunted and ate humans. Luckily for us, they went extinct around the end of the Ice Age, replaced by the smaller, faster, and well-adapted spotted hyenas. Rabbit Rex. Bunny rabbits are not particularly scary. Nobody's ever seen a rabbit eating a carrot and ran away in fear. But if you met Neuralagus 5 million years ago, you would flee in uncontrollable terror. Neuralagus rex is an extinct species of giant rabbit and the biggest scientists have ever discovered. It was about 10 times larger than any living rabbit, yet it was essentially the same animal. It was just really, really big. Neuralagus rex existed during the Pliocene epoch between 5 and 3 million years ago. It's the biggest member of the Lagomorpha family of animals, which includes all species of hare, rabbit, and pika. It stood at a height of nearly 2 feet and weighed 26 pounds. It wasn't big enough to bite your head off, but it was certainly more startling in its appearance than the European rabbit. It looked a little different than the bunnies you see at the pet store. Its skull was small, it had poor eyesight and bad ears, a short spine, and it couldn't hop. Fossils have shown that its forefoot slapped the ground when it walked, not just the tip of its toes. It couldn't possibly have hopped. On paper, it doesn't sound like a very successful animal. Neuralagus was essentially blind, deaf, and hobbled around from one patch of grass to the next. But still, it was big. It may have gotten so big and evolved such awful survival features because it lived a solemn existence on a small island in the Mediterranean. It was likely a smaller rabbit that arrived on the island first, then because of its loneliness grew to megalithic proportions. There were no predators on the island, so it really didn't need to hear or see, apparently. Neuralagus just kept getting fatter and developed creepy curved fingers so that it could dig for roots easily. Scientists think it ate underground food and spent lots of its time scrounging in the dirt. By the time other animals showed up on the island with a taste for meat, Neuralagus didn't have the tools it needed to avoid being eaten to extinction. Would you have a Neuralagus as a pet? Let me know in the comments. Cleveland's armored fish. 360 million years ago, there were fish in the ocean far more terrifying than any dinosaur. One of these fishes was Dunkleosteus terrelli, covered in a full suit of armor and ready for battle. Scientists have described it as a super predator, maybe even the very first apex predator that was a vertebrate. It lived during the Devonian period, known as the Age of Fishes. This was a time when much of the planet was covered in water. Land animals had yet to make an appearance, and the world was dominated by alien-like freaks in the ocean. And don't forget the gigantic fish the size of submarines. Dunkleosteus could grow to an estimated 30 feet and was known for cruising the subtropical waters of Cleveland. That was back when North America was in a much different position, near the current latitude of Rio de Janeiro. The first Dunkleosteus fossils were found at Lake Erie in 1867. In the 150 years of research since, scientists have made a lot of educated guesses about the animal, including its length. However, some experts don't think the length is correct. Scientists from Case Western Reserve University recently published their findings on the prehistoric predator, saying its length may have been exaggerated. Russell Engelman, PhD student in biology, says Dunkleosteus probably wasn't 30 feet long. Instead, it probably had a torso like a tuna and was chunky, not long. It had more girth than length, leading the researchers to nickname it Chunky Dunk, or Chunkelosteus instead of Dunkleosteus. But they were afraid the locals won't be happy about downgrading the size of the fish. Dunkleosteus is a big deal in Cleveland, basically the city's mascot. The fish even had its own Twitter account for a few years. Plus, most research done on the fish is based on specimens kept at the Museum of Natural History in Cleveland. The museum has the biggest collection of Dunkleosteus remains in the world. But public backlash doesn't make the science incorrect. Russell says the initial measurements were wrong. Russell says the armored fish was only 13 feet long, under half the original estimates. He based his findings on his measurements of the head, which he says correlates to the fish having a much more compact body. In the end, it really doesn't matter how big the fish was. It was still the original terror of the deep, the OG. 360 million years ago, Dunkleosteus was the biggest animal in existence. The forked trilobite. Trilobites used to get into fights. A new study suggests the ancient primordial sea creature, known as the trilobite, came equipped with huge horns that it used to combat its rivals. Not every kind of trilobite. After all, there were a lot of different species 250 million years ago. Trilobites were one of the most successful groups of animals to ever evolve. As a diverse group, they came in a lot of different shapes and sizes. A new study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences suggests Wallicerops trifurcatus had a secret weapon. On the front of its head was a trident. The trilobite looked an awful lot like a creepy beetle. You could compare prehistoric trilobites to modern cockroaches, only a bit bigger and not so disgusting. When researchers found the bizarre head ornament on this species of trilobite, they didn't know what it was for. Scientists suggested the trident was for hunting, meaning the trilobite came with its own built-in weaponry. But further studies showed the trident wasn't flexible. It couldn't possibly have been used for skewering animals. Now, scientists think the trident was used to flip over its competition. It may have used the three-pronged tool like a shovel or a pitchfork to flip annoying male trilobites on their backs when they try to invade claimed territory. The monster penguin. 60 million years ago on the shores of New Zealand, there was a bird about the size of an adult gorilla. Alan Tennyson from the Museum of New Zealand, Te Papa Tongarewa, came across the bones of the mysterious seabird in 2017. They were at the beach preserved in a concretion of sediment, bits of stone stuck in a cannonball-shaped rock. The rock had cracked open to reveal the tiny splinters of fossil, which Alan took back to his lab and analyzed. He and his colleagues quickly realized they were dealing with penguin bones. But the bones were too big. A single humerus was nearly 2 feet long, twice the length of an emperor penguin's humerus. They went back to scavenge for more fossils and soon found themselves putting together the skeletons of monstrous penguins. These things were huge, the size of bears. 3D models revealed truly scary water birds weighing an astounding 340 pounds and standing over 5 feet tall. The extinct penguin is named Kumimanu, and it was substantial. Researchers think the penguin was very closely related to flying birds. But once it lost its ability to take to the skies, it found itself stranded in New Zealand and feasting on everything it could find. Based on the earliest fossils, Kumimanu packed on pounds quickly, transforming itself into a behemoth. Do you think penguins would still be adorable today if they were this size of monsters? Let me know in the comments. And thanks for watching! Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already and give us a thumbs up for more. See you later. Bye!